Good evening and welcome. My name is Vince Firpo. I'm the Vice President for Public Engagement here at the Newberry Library. And I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome you to tonight's program. And I want to thank you for being here and joining us at the Newberry, whether or not you are physically here in our space or if you're joining us on the live stream this evening. I also want to make a very special thank you to the sponsor for the Writers on Writing series, Shanti Nagarkatti. Without her generosity and thoughtfulness, tonight's event would not be possible. I'm going to take a guess that some of you are new to the Newberry Library, and so I do want to just take a moment to tell you a little bit about what we do and who we are. We like to say at the Newberry that everything starts with our collection, and our collection spans more than 600 years of human history. We have 1.6 million books and 600,000 maps, 5 million manuscript pages, and a whole lot of other things hiding somewhere in this building. But what does that mean for all of you? So our mission at the Newberry is to connect you with the humanities and with the collection, and we do that in a variety of ways. One of the ways in which we do that is by providing free programs like the one tonight. And while I'm talking about programs, I just want to pause and note that the next two installments of the Writers on Writing series are already on the books, so mark your calendars. Please join us on January 23rd to hear from Hernan Diaz and Ananda Lima. And on May 22nd, we will welcome Carmen Machado and Megan Steelstra. In addition to these free programs, we mount 4 free exhibitions a year, which you're welcome to come view at any time. And we also offer adult education classes on a variety of topics. And if you're really ready to dive in and dig deep and come face to face with a medieval manuscript or a letter written by Thomas Jefferson or the papers of important writers like Gwendolyn Brooks, Jack Kerouac, and Eve Ewing, or even if you want to write your own story by studying your family history, all you need is a reader's card, and every corner of our collection is available to you. Those reader's cards are free, and they're easy to obtain, and our librarians are really eager to help you on your journey through the archive. Oop, I missed one. You heard me mention exhibitions. We have 2 exhibitions that are currently open on the far side of the lobby. They will be open after tonight's program, and if you're able, I invite you to stick around and view those. Indigenous Chicago, which just opened last week, tells the story of how Chicago has always been and continues to be a native place. And Chicago Style, Mike Royko and the Windy City Journalism, closes at the end of the month. This is an exhibition that takes a look at famed Chicago journalist Mike Royko. Our programs are free to you thanks to the generosity of our donors. If you are able, I encourage you to make a gift to the Newberry to help us do the work that we do. One of the easiest ways you can do that is by visiting our website and checking the little donate button in the top right-hand corner, or you can always visit our new fancy little kiosk that we recently got and just tap your phone there to make a contribution. We will be selling books by both authors in our bookshop this evening, and there will be a signing after tonight's program. I do ask that at the conclusion of the program, just hang out in your seats for a couple minutes while we let the authors kind of settle into the lobby before we all rush them to get our books signed. I know we're excited, but let's give them a moment to relax. We will host a Q&A at the end of the program. We ask that you text your questions to 833-899-3399. This allows us to make sure that A, everyone can hear the questions, and B, we can take questions from the live stream as well as those of you in the room. This number will remain on the screen throughout the duration of the program, so you do not need to memorize it. Writers on Writing is a really wonderful collaboration with the Newberry and our friends at StoryStudio Chicago. I now invite Sarah Kataya, Programs Director at StoryStudio, to talk about their work and then introduce you to tonight's speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Vince. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. As he said, some of you may be new to the Newberry, and many more of you may be new to StoryStudio Chicago. So StoryStudio Chicago is a nonprofit literary arts organization focused on building a writing community. We offer more than 200 online and in-person creative writing classes and events each year, which include everything from single session classes focused on one aspect of craft, to multi-session weekly classes, to full year-long programs. We nurture writers of all ages and all skill levels, and our programming covers all genres from short stories and novels to creative nonfiction like memoirs and essays, to poetry, screenwriting, satire, and just about anything else you can imagine. We're also proud to offer programming like tonight's Writers on Writing in partnership with the Newbery, with the goal to engage readers just as much as writers in our community. If you're interested in joining us for upcoming events, we want to make sure you know about our annual Writers Festival. This year's festival will take place November 2nd and 3rd at the Center on Halsted. Curated by our own Rebecca Makkai and Ananda Lima, the two-day festival will offer classes, panels, and social events to help writers develop their craft and create a supportive community. There will also be a couple of social parties so you can mingle and make friends with other writers here in the city. We're so excited that our keynote speaker for the festival is the talented Mona Awad. We hope you'll join us. We have general Story Studio brochures as well as postcards about the festival over on the table if you'd like to pick those up on your way out. Also, please feel free to find me after the conversation tonight if you have any questions. I'm always happy to chat with you about what we have going on at the studio. And one more thing I wanted to mention. So Susan is here this weekend or the next couple of days. Tomorrow morning, we actually have a breakfast and book club event that will be held from 9:30 to about noon. We have a couple of spots still left. There's a QR code over here if you would like to sign up. It's free to join with a suggested donation. This event tonight is going to talk about Susan's entire career, and tomorrow morning it will be focused on trust exercise specifically. So if you want a little bit more of an intimate conversation where you can sit down in the living room space and talk with her one-on-one, you can ask any of the Story Studio staff here tonight, or the QR code is over there, and we'd love to see you there as well. All right, and now with that, it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's speakers. Susan Choi is the author of 5 novels: The Foreign Student, which won the Asian American Literary Award for Fiction; American Woman, a finalist for the 2004 Pulitzer Prize; A Person of Interest, a finalist for the 2009 Faulkner Award; My Education, recipient of a 2014 Lammy Award; and Trust Exercise, winner of the 2019 National Book Award for Fiction. She serves as a trustee of PEN America and teaches in the writing seminars at Johns Hopkins University. Rebecca Makkai is the Chicago-based author of the novels The Great Believers, a finalist for both the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Award, The 100-Year House, and The Borrower. Her latest novel, I Have Some Questions for You, was released in February 2023 and was an instant New York Times bestseller. She is on the MFA faculties of Sierra Nevada College and Northwestern University and is artistic director of StoryStudio Chicago. Please join me in welcoming Susan and Rebecca tonight.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah. Really quickly before we start our conversation, I also want to say this is the kickoff to this year's Writers on Writing series. Last year was the first year of our collaboration. We had 3 really successful events, and this is the first one of this year. So if you want to mark your calendars, January 23rd, we have Hernan Diaz, author of the Pulitzer Prize winning Trust. We were going to go for a trust exercise, trust, something else theme.
Something
but
about exercise.
He is in conversation with Ananda Lima on January 23rd, and then we failed in our mission. On May 22nd, we have Carmen Machado, which is pretty great, though. And she will be in conversation with Megan Steele-Straw. So we are so excited for that whole series, right? It's a great series. And so we're so thrilled to start it with you, though. And
I'm so thrilled to be the start.
Yeah. The idea of this series, and I'll just say because this is the first one of the year, is really a back and forth conversation between 2 writers on craft and on not an interview about a new book. We try to get people, in fact, when they're not on book tour, if we can, so that it's more like This Is Your Life / Inside the Actor's Studio, and talk about the whole career, which I'm really excited to do. I think that we should explain not how we met, but how we mostly know each other.
Which is also how we met.
Well, I guess technically, by extension.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you want to explain this? Do you want me to?
Well, it would be interesting to see if our explanations
Yeah,
actually
yeah, yeah, yeah.
coincide.
Yeah,
We met through the Breadloaf School of English,
right.
which is a place that I started teaching in 2015. It's in the Green Mountains of Vermont. You know what? I'm going to do my version of
Yeah.
what I was told, because then you can come in and actually
Okay, this will
explain
be
what it
interesting.
really
Yeah,
is.
yeah.
I was going along minding my business when a wonderful colleague of mine, Paul Muldoon, the poet, said, "Why don't you come teach at this place? It's called Breadloaf. It's in the mountains. We go there for 7 weeks." And I said, "What?" I can't, I didn't understand. I had small children. I was like, I can't take my small children,
Yeah.
I thought I couldn't leave my small children.
Yeah.
So I misunderstood. A few years later, another person from this same place approached me again and explained that I could actually bring my small children with me. So that actually made the difference. I went to Breadloaf, which
Yeah.
turned out to be this remarkable English program in the Green Mountains of Vermont. It's this incredible convergence of creative people, scholars, and students. And it was one of the most wonderful experiences that I was ever, given the opportunity to have. And that's where I met Rebecca, who understands far better than me what it is even now, because she was a student there.
Way back, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's Middlebury College's graduate school for English literature, basically, is the short version. It's an MA in literature.
But that doesn't really get to
it doesn't
the,
get to it. Yeah, you did it better.
Summer camp in paradise feeling of
yeah.
it.
And a lot of people, a lot of writers will know Breadloaf from the Breadloaf Writers Conference, which is in the same place. But yeah, eventually we ended up co-teaching or tag team teaching a fiction class where I'll teach 3 weeks, you teach 3 weeks, and we're kind of handing these students off. And it's one of the things that's been, and it magically worked, right? We didn't know if it would, and it
I
magically
wanted to
worked.
jump in and say how magically it worked, but then I was afraid I would make us sound as if we didn't plan enough. Because the truth
we planned
is
plenty, but you don't,
we didn't plan that much. We just sort of said, well, why don't I just do a mini version of my class and you do a mini version of your class?
Yeah.
And they really meshed
Yeah.
in this way that I think not until the end of the first summer was I sure
Yeah.
they would mesh, but the students
Yeah.
seemed very happy.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, one of the things that I want to ask you about, because this struck me, it stuck in my mind that when we were first dividing up the class, we were talking about sort of craft topics. And I think I said over email, I actually really love teaching plot and structure. And you said, oh, thank God, because I really don't. And this was on my mind because I got to go back for this and really reread all of your books for this. A couple of them I hadn't read before, which was really exciting, and reread the ones I've read.
That's amazing. That makes one of us here.
Right, yeah. And I didn't do them in order, but that would have been interesting too. But you have phenomenal plots in that they are propulsive and unexpected. But I wonder if the unexpected part might be one of the gifts of not planning out a plot in a very classic way. And I wonder if you can...
Sorry, I'm quietly laughing.
Does that track?
Yes.
Okay.
First of all, thank you. And I can only weep with gratitude that you think so. Plot is the hardest thing for me. I should probably just stay for your half of the class. I really don't know how to do it in any but the backwards way of muddling forward with a situation. So I write from situation, and I can explain more about what that means. But I write from situation. I generate a bunch of stuff. I have no understanding of how to make it into a story, how to create structure and plot until I have tons and tons of the situation. And even then, it's a huge struggle. And so the fact that you recognize not just plot, but what you call propulsive plot.
Yeah.
So happy. Is kind of a miracle to me. And I think it must have something to do with a process that I can only describe as stumbling along blind for a really long period of time, just continuing to write.
Yeah.
And often having to go back and really make big changes in revision to sort of start pulling more of a story structure out of the situation.
I wonder, so I'm someone, I say that I start with situation too, or scenario, and I want to hear you define what you mean by that. But I wonder if that's part of what helps, because I think that when I have students or friends who start with character, the character's so beautifully drawn, but their struggle is making something happen.
Yeah.
And for me, it's always been a nice benefit of starting with scenario or situation that there's already a boiling pot of conflict.
Yeah, something's already happened.
How would you define starting with situation?
Well, I mean, I can't define it. I'm going to have to give examples. Because
Yeah.
it's always really different. And, just to take a few examples from my own work, I mean, my very first novel was very heavily based on my father's biography, which
Yeah.
I'd been kind of obsessed by, as you can be obsessed by a mysterious parent to whom things happened that you don't understand. And so I knew that my father had emigrated to this country in the 1950s, and he'd gone to the Deep South, and he was Korean, and that just seemed like such a weird situation.
Yeah.
And then I started basically like pillaging my father for things that had happened to him and writing a bunch of stuff that I thought was going to be stories because I had no idea how to make a plot. So I kept trying to write about like this incident, that incident, and ultimately like I had all this material and I had to try to pull it into,
Yeah.
a story arc. So that was one situation. But my second novel was really different because I was obsessed by the Patty Hearst kidnapping, as you are.
If you guys have not read American Woman, it is absolutely phenomenal.
Thank you. It just seemed like such a bad idea at the time, but I was obsessed by the Patty Hearst kidnapping, and I had no understanding of how to write about it, and all I would do was read about it. I read so much about it that one day I came upon a moment in one of the many nonfiction, works of journalism about this incident in the 1970s, and it's this moment at which Patricia Hearst and a young woman that she has kind of like fled underground with are sitting at their kitchen table in San Francisco. The other young woman is writing a letter home like, "Dear Mom and Dad, don't worry about me being wanted by the FBI and stuff. It's all good. I've made a new friend and we're both wanted, but it's going to be fine." And her writing of the letter is interrupted by the FBI kicking the door in.
Oh my God.
And so this is, a thing that actually happened.
Yeah.
And was reported in one of these books. But I was so electrified by, and the young woman writing the letter was very much a footnote to the Patty Hearst story. But that situation grabbed me because I was like, who are these two gals who have become friends under these weird circumstances? One of them's writing a letter home. The door gets kicked in. The problem with this situation is it was the end of the book. So I was like, oh my God, how am I going to do this? I just want to write a book that ends up here.
Yeah.
And that was yet another example of like my total lack of a system for coming up with plot.
But one of the things it seems that allows you to do is you don't get locked in. In many cases, you don't get locked into one point of view character. And I'm trying to think now, looking back, if there's any of your books where it's really in any one person's point of view the whole time.
I would say my fourth one is pretty locked into one point of view, and that was a big struggle too.
Yeah.
Actually.
Wait, no, I'm counting wrong. Wait, the fourth one is
My Education.
Yes, but
mostly from the point of view of one
that's
person.
true. You know what I was thinking about with that one? The thing that really surprised me. So My Education, it's a graduate student and her love affair with both the husband and wife of this professor couple, and it's amazing.
Very bad judgment.
And you're and you're reading along and you think, and then suddenly we leap forward many years, and suddenly it's not the point of view, but it's very focused for a while on her friend, who's I loved as a character, but was very peripheral, and went, whoa, we're over here now. So it wasn't point of view, but it was still that freedom of like, this was the story, but the story can go over here too, and we're just going to see how these things come together.
I think as we're talking, I'm realizing, and I'm very curious to know if this happens to you, because you started this conversation around the idea of the unexpected.
Yeah.
I can think of a couple examples, including the one you just cited, in which I actually just became so frustrated by what I was writing and felt so trapped in what I was writing that I kind of busted out of it because I couldn't stand it anymore. And so that's a benefit of not planning ahead.
Right.
I'm incapable of planning ahead, it would seem. And so, it never feels to me as if this is like a great thing that's happening, that I've like locked myself into a story situation that I find intolerable, like whether it's boring, sometimes happens, or whether I just feel sort of suffocated by it. My education is a book that's about this graduate student who sleeps with a married man and then sleeps with his wife, and a disaster ensues.
Yeah.
But there's also this other character in it who, at a certain point in the writing, I just couldn't stand her anymore, to be honest. I am very fond of her now, but I think sometimes when you're stuck with a character, especially a protagonist
Yeah.
who's deeply flawed, you yourself can become kind of annoyed.
Yes.
And I just remember thinking, I want to do just a big leap and end up somewhere else for a while.
Yeah.
And I really loved this secondary character.
Oh, he's
and
one of my. I think he's my favorite character in your books, actually.
That makes me really happy,
Yeah.
actually. But that again wasn't planned. It was kind of a function of being fed up. And
Yeah.
I think of you as a planner, in part because you're able to teach plot to our students. And so I want to know, does this happen to you? Are there things in your books that you feel like, I'm happy this happened, but the reason it happened is because I was so sick of what I was doing?
It's weird. I think I have this, one part of my planning is that before I start to write something, I'll think about it for 2 or 3 years. And in that thinking, I do most of my big picture plot stuff.
Yeah.
And so that's where I would suddenly be like, no, I'm going to do this instead. And what I like about it is I don't have to undo any work that's on the page, because I can just snap my fingers and it's done, because it's all mental. But there's still surprise. I don't know, though, that I've ever, and I would love to be able to. I think that in short stories I've done that, where I've gone, this was this, but I'm just leaping over to something else that I didn't expect to do. I've not been able to do it in novels, and I would like to be able to.
I think you're more efficient, though. This is why it's good that our students have both of us, because also I say things to my students that I always try to preface with, for me, comma, and but for me, comma, I can never figure out what the story is going to be without writing. I always have to be doing the thinking while I'm writing. And when I try to plan ahead in my brain, it just never works out. And you actually can do that.
To a certain extent.
I've told several of my students, stop trying to think it through, just start writing.
Yeah. I think it's a balance where it's like I need a fuzzy picture, but I want sort of a complete picture, and I don't want to be locked into it. I want to be able to start and then change my mind, and I don't know the details. And there's so much that you don't know until you start still.
Right, there's still discovery. Which is
especially about
fun.
character, who this person is. Yeah, definitely.
But you basically know what's happening.
Basically. Yeah. Sort of. Sometimes, not always.
Yeah. I mean,
always.
trust exercise is a complete product of this non-process of mine, of like not knowing what I'm doing and getting really fed up.
Yeah, can you talk about that? Because I think that's the book that probably the most people in the room have read. And it's also a book with sort of a break where we suddenly are reading something different than what we've read. I mean, how did that...
and it's also the book that is like the most owing to this non-process of getting really sick of what I'm doing and having no idea what should come. I mean, Trust Exercise was the result of an attempt to write a short story that failed first. So for anyone who's read it, and even if you haven't, this is a pretty clear scheme. It's in 3 parts, and part 1 is, it's long. It's like over 100 pages long, but part 1 was the product of a short story that I started, where I was really determined to actually write a short story, which I'm very bad at, because I have this extremely diffuse process where things just keep going out and out and out instead of coming in. And so I started this short story that was going to be really simple. And I even had I had the situation, but I felt like the situation was going to dictate a simple plot. The situation was young lovers who can't drive in a city with no mass transit. Well, they do. And I was like, this is simple. It's just a hookup story. They want to hook up and neither can drive. That's the conflict. It got longer and longer, and more people intruded upon their situation, and it became more and more complicated, and I got really fed up with it. I just couldn't figure out what to do with it, and I literally abandoned it for more than a year. I just put it aside because it was supposed to have been a story anyway. It wasn't supposed to be a book. And then a year later, for a variety of reasons that are complicated, I started thinking about it again and thinking about the characters and had a completely unexpected idea. I mean, it was so unexpected that I was kind of tickled. Like my unexpected idea was, what if it's actually a story? And one of the characters in the story is displeased with her representation, is like, I don't like the way the story has been told thus far. I've been a very minor character. No one consulted me. And she just hijacks the story. And it was enough to make me feel like going back to it.
That's so cool.
But it wasn't planned. And it was so deeply weird. And after I wrote her, which I wrote really, really quickly because she was so much fun, then there was another period of like, now what is it? You know? And I really didn't know. I wrote many, many additional chunks because I felt like, now what is it? It's two things. It felt like it needed something else. Maybe a couple more things. I kept writing something else's and sending them to one of my best friends who lives in LA and actually is capable of plot. She's a brilliant television writer. And at one point I sent all of the something else's that I had to her together, and I didn't explain to her that I wanted her to choose her favorite. And she thought that it was just all of them in sequence, and she was like, you're getting so experimental. But the whole thing was this sort of weird muddle.
That's fascinating. I will say that one thing that's happened to me, especially in short stories, has been where I've kind of gotten to the end of something and then gone, I need more. And that's when the surprises have come. Like, I'm going to write one more paragraph, no one more paragraph, no one more paragraph.
And you keep doing that until you've written a book.
Yeah, well, or in one case, yes, I did have a short story that turned into a book. So that, and that maybe is similar, kind of like, oh, this, I'm changing what this is. But if nothing else, just that, like, you have this nice, neat, pat, predictable ending. Well, what if you had to write another paragraph? Would you leap forward in time? Would you hand it to someone else? What would you do? And I've made students do that too. Sometimes they'll like just take your story. What would you write if you had to write something else now? And it can go cheesy, but it can also save the story, I think.
See, I love those big leaps that happen. And now it should be said, I'm so envious that you can write stories. I really, despite having accidentally done it a few times, I really can't seem to work in that scale. And I think it's partly a function of having difficulty planning and having to do the discovering inside the writing, and that often takes up a lot of writing to do it. But the short story form is my favorite form. And writers who can both have that short form and do really unexpected things within it, to me, are the magicians. Like, I don't know how you manage that.
Well, did you start with short stories way back? What did you start with? The very first things that you wrote that you took seriously?
Or how far back are we going?
I mean, let's go all the way back.
I took myself very seriously at a very early age.
I did too.
It was easier then for some reason. When I was very young, and I mean 8. I wrote short stories that were like maybe 50 words long. Where I was like, they went camping. There was a spider. They couldn't sleep. The end. And like, that's an actual story that I read as my first publication.
Oh my God.
It's actually longer than that, ladies and gentlemen. You can go seek it out. It's probably like a paragraph. But when I was really young, I really liked reading. So my first efforts at writing were basically like totally derivative.
Of course.
Sort of rip-offs of things that I had read. And I just didn't have a lot of stamina. So it seems as if I was much more able to write short things. When I grew up and became sort of self-conscious, I think that's where the problems begin, right? Where you start sort of thinking like, well, what am I doing here? I went back to writing when I was a college student, and I wrote short stories mostly because of the, pedagogical
that's
structure.
What gets workshopped.
That's what you're supposed to bring into class. But already then the problems were evident. Like, my short stories did not have plots. They felt very situational. They felt like these situations where there's none of that stuff that I'm always urging my students, in this way that feels hypocritical because I'm so bad at doing it at that length. I'm always urging my students, like, where's the conflict? Where's the story arc? How are you going to resolve the situation? I was never able to do that.
But then you were able to with novels. So was The Foreign
Yes.
Student the first novel that you drafted, or did you try other novels first and then?
It was the first novel that I ever drafted completely.
Yeah.
When I was in graduate school. So I went and got an MFA in my early 20s. And that was where I think this kind of internal struggle between the short story and the novel started playing itself out without my really understanding what was happening. So once again, I was trying to write for workshop, which meant bringing in some beautiful jewel-like complete thing that would
Yeah.
make everyone cry, and then your professor would say, "My God, Susan, send it to the New Yorker already,"
Right.
which is actually a riff on a joke that went around our workshop about one of our professors, and the joke was that. Should I tell this story?
Yes,
Actually,
please
this
do.
is kind of fun because I loved her so much. One of our professors, this wonderful writer, Stephanie Vaughn, had been a Stegner Fellow before she had, become a grown-up person who taught our workshop. And the story that always went around was that every time she brought anything into the Stegner, her teacher would say, "It's perfect. Send it to the New Yorker." And the next day it would be in the New Yorker. And that was like just kind of her career trajectory that we all sort of repeated to each other, wondering like, when will this happen to us?
Right.
So I kept trying to bring in the beautiful, perfect thing that, of course, never was really complete.
Yeah.
It always sort of had this shaggy quality to it. And I was trying to write about my father. And so I was bringing in a lot of these incomplete feeling, shaggy, no story arc stories,
Yeah.
all of them based on my father's life in Korea or his life after coming to this country. And meanwhile over here in my brain, I decided to write a novel
Uh-huh.
about some completely different subject, and I had no idea how to do it. So by the end of graduate school, I had a chunk of a novel, which was really almost entirely like, I think, physical description and very long, very boring character portraits.
Yeah.
She was the kind of woman who
Yeah.
blah, 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 and like nothing happening. And then I
Yeah.
had all of these little things happening that were all about this character based on my father.
Yeah.
And, I left graduate school really feeling like a total failure. And then some time passed and I started wondering, was all of this stuff that I was trying to make into stories, did it actually all want to belong together?
It's a very ugly duckling story. Like you think you're supposed to grow up to do one thing and you're actually something else.
It's like the story of all my books, though.
Yeah.
Actually.
Do you feel like all of them started off trying to be something other than what they ended up? Or
No, I do think I've gotten better at figuring out when I'm writing a book, but I do
Yeah.
think that each of my books have gone through an ugly duckling period of my not really knowing
yeah.
how they were going to work.
Yeah.
Like I sort of knew, well, this is about this. It's a book. But as for the question of plot and structure, like that's the part that I stumble along figuring out in the dark every time.
And I do, as much as I'm a planner, I will say that if I look back on my original notes for any book, totally different direction, totally different takeaways, different.
Do you outline?
I usually outline about a
does.
third of the way in. Like
You do?
Yeah, like I
Okay.
need to get going. I need to really get
Yeah.
going, and then I can stop and kind of go, what have I done? Like retroactive, and then a little
Yes.
ahead.
But you do the midway retroactive outline. Does
Yeah.
that just then become kind of also like a midway prospective outline?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, and
That's
it can
so
maybe it's
interesting.
when I need to rebuild my foundations anyway,
Yeah.
so I'm kind of figuring. But then at the end, I definitely. So do you do a retroactive outline, or do you do any?
I do something like a retroactive outline now or often. In the beginning, I think like it's so hard to unlearn the things that we're taught when we're young.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I was taught was the standard outline structure with like capital letters.
Oh, like
and then
Roman
numbers
numerals?
and then
Oh
small
my God.
letters where it's like A,
When
and
I
then
say
1,
outline, that
2,
is not
3.
what I mean.
Well, that's the thing. It's like I think I'm haunted by this. I think I had that really beaten into me. Like that's an outline. I had this understanding for a really long time that like that was an outline. Like an outline was this complete sort of architecture with capital letters and small letters, and they denote different things. And then there's maybe Roman numerals and the other
Arabic.
kind of numeral.
Yeah.
And they denote different things. And it kind of has a stair-step
Uh-huh,
form.
uh-huh.
And everything's in it. And then you go just boom, 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 boom. And that never worked.
Yeah.
And what it took me, I think, like decades to figure out is that you can actually create your own outlining practice that just rises out of what you need. And it took really, I think Jennifer Egan was maybe the person who helped me understand that an outline could be retroactive of a big mess that you'd made.
Yeah.
Where I was like, I made a big mess and I just don't even understand what it is. And she was like, oh, don't you ever outline? Like, she was like, I always write a draft and then I outline it because otherwise I have no memory of what I wrote.
Yeah.
And it had never occurred to me to do that because
amazing.
I too had no memory of what I'd written.
Yeah.
And I would just sort of go like, paging through it in this kind of helpless state.
Well, I think I often have a false sense, like the 2 pages that I labored over for weeks, I think take up a big part of the novel.
Yes, you're like 30 pages.
Right.
And it turns out to be 4 paragraphs.
Yeah, and then meanwhile, the thing that came out really fast, I think, is really quick, and it takes up a lot.
Yeah.
Like, you have to really sort it out and literally, like, really take inventory of what you have.
Often just actually by making, so I don't really make an outline so much as I make a table of contents.
Yeah.
A kind of a retroactive table of contents of like, okay, here's a bunch of pages and here's what they contain. And it's really instructive because sometimes you discover that events that you felt like were very far separated are much closer together than you thought.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Or redundancies that you find.
Yeah.
That,
pacing is very, very weird. But, But yeah, it's much easier for me to get some sort of, I don't know, perspective on what's going on now that I do this kind of look back thing.
I feel like outlining is anything you do where you can back away from the project and see the whole thing, whether that's a drawing or a timeline or a list. It's like, it's any of that, I think. Yeah. But do you feel like you've embraced that more, like that's come into play more in your last few books, or?
I'm thinking about the book that I'm in the process of finishing,
which I want to ask about in a second.
I'm actually like so excited because today, before coming here to meet you, I opened up the copy edited file of my new book and like figured out how to deal with it without it exploding. Because I think when you get a copy edited file from your publisher and it has all these different colors and all these different windows and and I'm always terrified that track changes is going to like vaporize. If I touch the wrong thing, that like just everything will vaporize and no one will ever know what had happened. So I opened it today and just kind of went in and figured out like what I could do without the whole thing disappearing. But I do think that like I've learned I'm a very, very slow learner of organizational strategies. It's actually like a thing that I think about a lot right now in my life because I have 2 teenage children and I actually like watch them struggling enormously to organize their thoughts, their tasks, their possessions, and I've always thought of myself as being organized, and I'm really not organized at all.
I think very few writers are. Very few artistic people are, honestly.
Yeah, it's funny. Like I actually like glow a little inside to hear you use the word artistic. I feel like am I artistic? I don't think of myself as being artistic, but I do think of myself as being disorganized. So at this stage, like at the 6th
intervention
book,
here.
Like I've come up with a few like they're pretty comically obvious things that I do. Like you'll laugh. One of them is that I actually at some point print it all out.
Yeah.
Punch holes in it and put it in a binder so that I don't like literally lose chunks of it everywhere, which is what I used to do.
Yeah.
I used to just have chunks of it everywhere and I would never even know like which version it was.
Right.
And now I do this retroactive table of contents at intervals.
Yeah.
And I date it.
Yeah, it took me a really long time to figure out that I should not label my computer files with final version or like even more final version.
Right, you're
really
like, which final
but
version
to put a
could
date.
this be? Yeah, I try to date them now too, although even that's a little confusing because I write entirely, I compose on the computer.
Yeah.
And I often like overwrite or change things, even though I'm trying to tell myself like, don't do this. And so
Yeah.
I'll sometimes like freeze a draft. Like I'm like, okay, this is the draft of September 19th.
Yeah.
And I'm going to print it out and like, you know, have a memorialization of like what things were like now.
Right.
And then
which
start a
makes
new
it
version.
safer to change something, because I think if you know I can always go back to this,
Yes. Yes.
it feels safer to make some kind of leap.
Absolutely.
Like go
Especially
into
since
someone
often
else's.
my ideas are not good. And then it's like, I shouldn't have done this. And where's that version of this that
Yeah.
actually worked a little better?
But I think that when people, when it feels permanent, when you're like, should I change it into third person or whatever, and you sit there and you try to think forever about if it's the right decision, it's really unproductive versus just saying, I'm going to save it
Yeah.
and I'm going to do it and I'm going to
Yeah.
see if it works or not. Because
Yeah.
that's how you get to someplace interesting.
I know. It took so long to figure that out.
Yeah.
I mean, as you said that, I was thinking my fourth book, My Education, this one about the graduate student, was written in first person. Was it written in first? What was
Yeah.
it? What?
Yes,
I mean,
having just read it, I will tell you it's written in first person.
Is it in first person?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Wait, are you sure?
I'm pretty sure, because when her name comes up, it's only when people call her Regina. She doesn't. It's not like Regina.
So
It's
she's like, I did this, I
yeah,
did that.
yeah.
Oh, that's
yeah.
so crazy. That's not my memory of it at all. I was about to tell a story about how it was in first person and it didn't work, and I changed it to third.
Oh my god!
It's really in first. So
It's really, and it does work.
Yeah. So this is, I don't reread my own books. So this, it must have been the opposite.
Yeah,
It must
yeah.
have been in third person.
Yeah.
But it was definitely in one of those
Yeah,
two.
yeah.
And I'd written a lot of it. And I
Yeah.
was like, this is just, I can't, it was unbearable to me.
Yeah.
And so I rewrote it in the other voice and
Yeah.
I guess published it in that voice. But as you're speaking, I'm thinking like, where is that other version? Like
Right.
now, you know, a decade later, I'd actually kind of love to see
Yeah.
that other version, the
Yeah, with-
discredited, version that I didn't publish, and I have no idea where it is.
Yeah.
Like, did I save it? Is there? I don't know.
I would love to see that too, because that first person makes so much possible in terms of sort of self-mockery almost, that would be, yeah.
I'm glad it works.
Yeah, it really
like
did.
it's really strange to me that in my mind it's in the third person.
Yeah,
that
That's
just,
incredible.
Yeah.
I'm 99.9% sure, but I'm very confident because I just read it like last week. So.
Right. Well, later we'll go. Is there one over there? No. Anyway,
yeah,
we'll-
someone can. Yeah,
we'll
yeah,
figure
yeah.
it out.
So right before Liv hands me this iPad with audience questions, can you tell us anything about the book that's coming out in June?
Ooh, I'd love to. Are there things I'm not supposed to tell you? Like, it's, again, disorganization. I should have thought of that sooner. It's called Flashlight. It is, I can't say based on exactly. I published a short story in 2020. After our discussion of like my inability to write short stories, it's kind of interesting to say I published a short story in 2020 called Flashlight in the New Yorker, and I want to say works as a story. And I'm a long time snarky critic of novelists who take what I consider to be a perfect short story of theirs and blow it up into a novel. And I'm always like, why did their name here have to do that? And that's what I did. So as I was doing it, I was thinking like, here you go, doing this thing. But the truth is that the short story that I published was, this is an example of like the fact that I had done a lot of thinking. It was kind of carved out of a story world that was already a lot larger. And I just couldn't figure out how to write it at all. I had this sense of a family, things that had happened to them, and a lot of time. And I just couldn't figure out a way into this story at all. And so I ended up writing this story in which, this is kind of like a good trick that I should tell my students. I was like, pretend that all the bad stuff already happened. Because I couldn't figure out how to tell it. So I was like, pretend all that bad stuff already happened, and it's just the fallout. And in fact, the bad stuff that's happened isn't even really explained in the story. The story's about a young child who's been taken to a child psychologist because she's acting out in school because bad stuff has happened to her family. So I wrote it in that spirit, and I was kind of delighted with the result, but I still had all of that, like the big dark nimbus of what had actually happened around the edges.
Yeah.
And I knew what it was. I knew that larger story, but hadn't been able to execute it. So then I did,
Yeah.
maybe. And that's the book.
That's so exciting. And it's going to be out June.
June 3rd, 2025.
Amazing. Oh my God, that's so exciting.
I'm amazed to even say those words. I just
Yeah.
learned that date last week.
Amazing.
I'm really excited.
So I have some audience questions here. I'm not going to be able to get to all of them, but I'm going to find some of them here. So let's see. Do you have any advice for an aspiring first-time novelist without an MFA who is established in another field? I'll say, I don't have an MFA either, whoever you are. You don't need an MFA.
Yeah, let me just start with the MFA part. I have an MFA, and the relationship of that to my career, very tenuous.
Yeah,
As described earlier in this evening, I really didn't do myself any favors while I was an MFA student. I went too young. I was really lost. I didn't take advantage of my teachers. I just did not know what I was doing.
Yeah.
And I kind of learned how to write and figured out how to write a book after I was in the MFA. I mean, the MFA did everything it could for me, but I was just not ready. And so I would say, first of all, don't feel as if you need to go to an MFA. I think my biggest piece of advice would be, find yourself a community of other writers who also like to read, and just put together your own MFA community. I mean, that's the thing that I should have used my MFA to assemble, is my group of trusted readers who are also writers with whom I could share work reciprocally and keep each other accountable and get help when you get stuck. And that's the best thing about an MFA program, is that you can kind of find those great future colleagues. And that's what I failed to do in my program. And you managed to do it without doing an MFA, and I managed to do it afterwards.
I'll say one thing with StoryStudio, which you heard Sarah talk about before. We have many students with MFAs, and we have many students without MFAs, some who go on to get them. And doesn't seem to be any real correlation between who gets published or who's successful and who has an MFA. But what they all do have in common is that they've all come to that place looking for community and are very serious about their writing. Which is,
join a writing group, form a writing group.
Or come to StoryStudio, that works too.
That's a writing group right there.
So this is a great question. It seems we all have recurring themes or characters we want to continuously write about, the example of your father's experiences. What methods do you use to write about the same things in different stories without feeling redundant and or keeping it fresh for both you and your audience?
That's such a good, this is my biggest worry in life. In fact, I'm not sure if I have an answer, because I am really preoccupied by my existential problem, which is that my father was a really, really big figure in my life, and I miss him every day. He passed away a few years ago, and I have just written about that poor man so much, and I'm on the verge of doing it again. And I literally lie awake at night going, no, Susan, don't do it again. Don't write about your dad. I think that, honestly, I know that, this is maybe a controversial thing to say in this moment, but Philip Roth is a really important writer to me because of I just feel his uncompromising honesty about what he was preoccupied by, which was largely himself and his family. And I don't think that you should feel apologetic for the things that are really your material. If it's your material and it continues to be really compelling to you, it's going to be interesting to other people. You're not going to be repetitive. I really believe that.
I'll say I have 5 books out as well, and all of them are very different from each other. And I still see very common themes, and I'm always fighting against that. But if you don't write about the same thing all the time, then you get the why are your books so different from each other? So you might as well.
Win.
But my example on that is always John Irving, because the number of his books that have a bear in them, and the number of his books where someone's limb gets severed. I swear to God. And there's wrestling. A lot of the books have wrestling.
Or they're
right. Seriously, if you look through so many bears, so many severed limbs.
Yes.
I don't know what's going on.
Personally, I love this about my favorite writers. I love that you feel like you know them.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, there's the psyche that gave rise to this work. And so you know, I often, like with my students, I'm like, it might take you a while to find that stuff, but, you know, don't ever feel like the mine is empty or the well is empty or whatever, that, both terrible metaphors,
Yeah.
unless it's really empty for you. When you're like, I think I'm done with this, then you are.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm still worried about writing about my dad again, but I'm obviously, I mean, let's check back in 5 years. I probably will have done it.
If you do, the thing is, though, you'll be writing about it from a completely different point in your life.
Yeah.
Like you'll be writing about it as the mother of grown children, for one thing.
Yeah.
And it would be a completely different.
Yeah, and I'll be
book.
writing about him from, you know, from the perspective of having lost him now, which is a very different thing.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Someone asked, this is actually funny. There was a lot of talk about the challenges in the writing process. Writers like to complain. That's my editorial comment. What is the most rewarding aspect of the craft?
Oh, wow. I mean, boy, I want to hear your answer.
Ooh.
I'll say I find rewarding, this is very related to the previous question, the fact that like anything that happens to you in your life, no matter how awful, you're like, maybe I'll write about it someday.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, even like that really bad day at the DMV, it's like, this has been a total waste of, oh no, maybe not.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll write about it someday. And so that's very gratifying.
Including genuine heartbreak, including really awful, you know,
But like all the bad things, genuine heartbreak, deep annoyance, like, you know, it's all sort of grist for the mill. And the older I get, the more I realize how true that is. And it's fun. It's a fun thing about the work.
It's like, do my microphone just stop?
Uh-oh.
Shoot. No, it's back. Okay, good. It's also kind of instant art therapy in a way, right? Like this is a way that people process things even when they're not really writers, don't see themselves as wanting to be a writer. It's still a way to process. And then for, you know, we're processing it through the lens of fiction, but that's absolutely valid.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to say also one more thing on that. I find that writing gets more gratifying the longer I do it and the less I worry about the publication part of it, strangely enough. Like the publication part of it is like one big wing of the worry castle, but I like, I really like, I write in notebooks, I write junk on my computer when I'm working through things that I never think like, oh, will this be in a book? Like, because the writing itself has become, I don't know, it's a real solace and refuge.
I think I've found something similar where, you know, like you're a kid and you're writing and it's not for anyone, it's so fun.
Yeah.
And then you start to take yourself seriously and there is that possibility of publication and even, you know, first couple of books even that just that suddenly aware that, oh my God, there's an audience that's going to judge me for this. And now I know how mean people are on Goodreads, and right?
And never look at it.
No, you know, you never should. But then after, I think now I'm kind of at a point of like, you know, it's starting to be fun again.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm getting there too. And I think one thing that's really fun about it is that I think there is a separation, at least for me, that started to form between the publication life, which is quite stressful for where I'm like, things need to be published. I want to publish things. That's, you know, that's kind of its own ordeal. And the writing that's just for me. That I just do where I'm like, I'm never going to try to publish this. But I hope no one ever sees it, actually.
Yeah. It's amazing. Okay. Actually, I think we have time for maybe two more if one of them's short. I think we kind of got to this, but it'd be interesting to hear you answer it just in the way that this question is phrased. Do you feel locked in to writing a traditionally structured novel? Or is there a possibility of letting something be shaggy?
Ooh, great question. I don't feel locked in. Actually, if anything, ironically, after Trust Exercise was so successful, and let me just say, I know I have to be fast, but I did describe the genesis of that book, but then I did work really, really hard to make that book work as a book.
Right, it's not like you just took the pile that you sent your friend.
Yeah, it wasn't like I just wrote this weird thing and then wrote another thing and a third thing, and I was like, here you go. Like, once it was clear that it was this unconventional structure, then a lot of work followed to try to make it work, and it was so well received, and that was such a delightful surprise that I then actually felt almost the opposite pressure to not write conventionally, or like to not sort of do what I have done in most of my other books, which is, you know, I would say more what I would call a more sort of realist
Yeah.
story. And so, and then I got over that and was like, you know what, I'm just going to have to write whatever it is that
Yeah.
works. But I love shagginess as a
Oh.
reader.
Totally.
And so I do feel like I've given myself permission
Yeah.
to do that. And it informs more and more of my reading choices, actually. I'm so interested in writers who are doing something kind of odd, unexpected, a little open-ended.
I love just kind of having the narrative rug pulled out from under me, which Trust Exercise definitely did, or just thinking I'm going one way, ending up going another
Yeah.
way. That's maybe, some readers would maybe sometimes want the comforts of formula, and that's great, but then sometimes, or there are some of us who want the wonky thing that
Yeah.
is.
Or you want different things at different times.
Of course,
I mean, sometimes
yeah.
I want something really wonky. Sometimes I'm like, I just want to like climb into a big Dickensian
Yeah,
novel with like a
yeah.
whole lot of people where you know that everything's going to turn out.
Yeah. Or you read a mystery, or
Yeah.
where it's absolutely not trying to mess with you. It's just, yeah. Okay, the last question here, I tell you what, I'll answer this first so that you can have the last word and answer it last. Is I have not read anything by either of you. You are forgiven, don't worry. If I can only choose one from each of you, what should I read? I know this is like asking you to pick your favorite child, but there's only so much time. So I'll answer first so that you can have the last.
We assume this is a very abstract question, and what you will actually do, whoever you are, is go order everything. And
Well,
you're just
yeah.
wondering, well, what should I read first?
Yeah, right, exactly. My answer is going to be, I mean, you could read whatever you want, but I will say for a Chicago audience, I would say The Great Believers, which is about the AIDS epidemic in Chicago in the 80s.
Oh, and it's such a great book,
thank
and
you.
it's such a great Chicago book. I lived in Chicago very briefly when I was young, and reading The Great Believers made me feel like I was in certain neighborhoods again.
Oh, thanks. Appreciate it. So yeah, it's presuming this is someone local. I mean, maybe they could be online and they could live somewhere else, in which case read whatever you want. But if you're local, I think you should read The Great Believers. What's your insight?
I think you should read The Great Believers too.
No.
What is mine? It's a very, very hard question to answer, and I guess I will not refuse the question by naming more than one book. Why not begin at the beginning? I mean, my first book. Ooh, I just realized something. My first book has some Chicago in it. I forgot.
Oh, that's right. They come. That's true. They come drive through and see. Yeah.
OMG, there's a whole Chicago section.
Yeah.
So
there you go.
There's your answer.
Foreign Student.
My first book is called The Foreign Student. It's based on the life of my father, but highly fictionalized. Very, very loosely based. And there is a Chicago section. And that section, I will say, is truly based on an experience my father shared with me of having a summer job in Chicago when he was a young man. So there you go.
There you go. Start with that,
Chicago
and then you'll get
lit.
hooked, and then you'll read all the others too. So really quickly, before we thank Susan, I'll just remind you that we're both signing books out there. We want to support the Newberry Library's bookstore. There's more information about everything at StoryStudio over there, including about tomorrow morning's book club. So if you want to really sit down in a small group with Susan and ask more questions and talk about Trust Exercise, please sign up. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.